Hello YouTube, it's been a while since we made a proper video. Um, I've been working and trying to scrape by and make money, and being tired and all of that. It wasn't really a conscious choice to take a break, it was just more I fell out of the habit of making videos. For the moment though, I'm gonna try and do like one a week. That being said, I want to talk about faith, which I find to be such an interesting topic. And I feel like there's just not a lot of satisfying discourse about it um, here on YouTube, right? Because for some reason, the Christians on YouTube, or not just on YouTube, in the apologetic world, for instance, have totally disavowed faith, right? Frank Turek has a book called "I Don't Have Enough Faith to Be an Atheist," right? Um, it blows my mind, right? How apologists um, want to remove faith. Faith is a dirty word, right? No. Christianity is reasonable, right? Or William Lane Craig, reasonable faith, right? It's his book. Um, and I want to say that I don't think faith is reasonable. Um, I don't I don't know what that means, in fact. On the other hand, though, I think that the atheists on YouTube tend to reduce it to something like anti-evidentialism. And I think it is anti-evidentialist, but it's not reducible to that, right? I don't think it's quite that. So, what is faith then? And I work very much within a Kierkegaardian context with respect to this question. If you look at Kierkegaard's first upbuilding discourse, he talks about faith, or his edifying discourse, depending on how you want to translate that title. And he defines faith there, and it's one of, he didn't write a lot of material in his own name, right? He writes with a lot of pseudonyms because he doesn't want to necessarily commit to the views in a lot of his essays. He's just sort of playing with ideas and presenting characters through which he can speak. But the first upbuilding discourse is written in his own name, right? It's by Soren Kierkegaard. So I think it's probably one of the best jumping off points for understanding what he actually thought. So what's faith then? For him, he defines it as the expectation of victory, right? Now, what's victory, right? This is interesting. It doesn't mean something like I'm gonna get that promotion, right? Or something like that. It means something transcendent, right? In the end, I will be victorious, right? In the end, my suffering will be worth it. In the end, my suffering will be redeemed, potentially even undone somehow, right? What makes that possible? Well, with God, all things are possible, right? So it's not something that's tied to concrete events. It's not something that's tied to the concrete reality of my day-to-day life. It's something that exceeds that, right? In the end, I will be victorious. That is what faith is for Kierkegaard. It's the expectation of victory. Now, built within that, is an aspect of unconditionality, right? Faith is a kind of unconditional commitment. That is, you can't there are no conditions of possibility. It's not that things are going well, therefore I can believe, right? It's not that I have been rewarded and therefore I might expect to be rewarded in the future. No, there are no conditions, right? It is unconditional. And that unconditionality is the level at which I think atheists take issue, right? Because if something is unconditional, then by definition there is no evidence that could overturn that, right? There is no circumstance that could overturn it. And this, I think it's fair to say, and I think most reasonable Christians would agree also, makes faith really dangerous, right? It's a very dangerous existential category. Because in this sense it's unreasonable, right? Because there is no evidence, because there are no conditions for this thing, you cannot be reasoned out of it, right? There is no argument or evidence that can be provided that can overturn this thing. So again, very, very dangerous. But I actually like the idea, believe it or not. I like the idea of faith. And going back to the first upbuilding discourse, Kierkegaard has a line in there where he says something like, it's the one thing that can never be taken from me, right? No matter what they do to me, no matter what happens to me in the world, because of this thing is unconditional, it cannot be taken from me. This for me is very powerful. It is the reason why it's dangerous, because I think it's very powerful. It can motivate atrocities, but it can motivate wonderful things as well. We see this illustrated time and time again in the Bible. We see it probably most famously in the book of Job. Terrible, terrible, terrible things befall Job. And he still maintains his faith. He argues with God. He wrestles with God, right? He's not totally passive or anything like that. But he maintains his faith. That, again, is very powerful. It tells us something about the existential reality of faith that I think is appealing. It's a source of strength, right? I don't mean to say that the book of Job is a moral book, right? Like, none of this is really a matter of value judgments, right? I'm not trying to say, yeah, the book of Job is this wonderful thing. I think it's a very interesting book, but I can see why people go, oh, that's horrible. Why would you even talk about it in those kinds of terms? But Job sort of illustrates this mindset. No matter what befalls him, he has something that cannot be taken from him, right? And he has something that he can build off of. He has something that helps him persist. And that's what's interesting. He can take. I saw the most recent X-Men film recently, and Xavier talks about hope at one point. He says it's what allows us to take all the suffering of the world on ourselves and still not break, right? Faith plays a similar role. Job doesn't break, right? The more extreme example is Abraham and Isaac and that story. He has faith that God will keep his promises. Out of Isaac I will make many nations, and then he tells Abraham to kill Isaac. Abraham has faith that God will keep his promise, even if it requires a resurrection, right? He will somehow get Isaac back, right? Isaac will not be finally murdered. It can't happen, right? And that belief is what allows him to go through with this thing. Now, that's just as much of a criticism of faith as anything else, because it allows him to go through with this kind of potentially monstrous act. He would have gone through with it if it wasn't interrupted. And so there are two sides to this coin, right? I think that we can talk about faith in a sort of humanistic way. Um, I think that we can talk about it in a sort of existential way. We can talk about it in terms of how I live my life on a day-to-day level. And part of being human is the capacity to be faithful, if not necessarily to God, then to other things, a project that I undertake in the world, to my family, to my friends, or something like that. And there's a certain level of unconditionality there too, right? I love my family. That love is unconditional, right? So unconditionality is not always a bad thing, I don't think. Now, so as with anything else that's human in the world, as with any other sort of disposition or potential orientation towards the world, what I would say against the atheist, my compatriots, my comrades, is that it's not the form. Faith is a form, right? It's a container. It can be mobilized for all sorts of different uses. It's part of our human potential in the world. We're capable of making unconditional commitments. It's a very dangerous form, but in itself, it has no value either way. It's whatever content that you put into that. I have faith in a wife. I have faith in a family. I have faith in my friends. I have faith in whatever. It's whatever content that you plug into that renders the thing good or bad. Again, I think the stakes are very high with respect to the concept of faith. I think, for one, a humanistic example of faith, I think you could probably point to some versions of Marxism as being something like faith that a new world will dawn, right? And Marx gives a little bit of evidence and such, but so Marx himself wouldn't have seen this, but I think that there are examples in history of people who took on Marxism through that existential disposition of faith. That is, there are people who acted and oriented themselves towards the possibility of the glorious communist revolution through the lens of faith. And it can get very dangerous. It can get very bloody and very terrible. So this is why I think Christianity has been very good, going back to the scriptures, about tempering it, right? With something like love, right? Without love, faith is a clanging cymbal, a noisy gong, or whatever Paul says. I don't remember the exact line. It's one of these things that is so powerful in someone's life that it's potentially deadly, right? Like, the stakes of faith are life and death stakes, I think. That in itself isn't sufficient, for me at least, to disavow the whole concept. Yeah, so that's just me kind of trying to work through this thing. I'd recommend reading Kierkegaard's first Upbuilding Discourse and Fear and Trembling, where he talks extensively about Abraham and how he relates to faith. And yeah, leave your thoughts below. Have a good day.